The silver tray felt heavier than usual in Elena Martinez's hands as she walked through the crowded penthouse. Maybe it was because she hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, trying to save every penny for her younger brother's school supplies. Or maybe it was the weight of being invisible in a room full of people who spent more on champagne than she made in a month. The Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, making the whole place look like something from a movie. Elena had been working these high-end parties for 3 years now, but she still felt like she was trespassing in someone else's world. The guests floated around in designer clothes, their laughter tinkling like the expensive crystal they drank from. She moved between them like a ghost, refilling glasses and picking up empty plates, careful not to make eye contact or draw attention to herself. "More champagne at table 3, her supervisor whispered as he passed by. Elena nodded and headed toward the kitchen to reload her tray. Her feet ached in the cheap black flats she'd bought from a discount store, but at least they were quiet. On the marble floors. That was important in this job, being quiet, being invisible, being nothing more than a pair of hands that kept the party flowing. The host of tonight's party was Richard Blackstone, a man whose name appeared in the business section of newspapers more often than most people appeared in their own family photos. He'd made his fortune in real estate, buying up old buildings and turning them into luxury apartments that regular people could never afford. Elena had seen him at a few events before, always surrounded by people who laughed too loud at his jokes and nodded too eagerly at his opinions. As she carried a fresh tray of champagne back into the main room, something caught her eye and made her stop for just a moment. There in the center of the room stood the most beautiful piano she'd ever seen. It was a Steinway Grand, its black surface polished to such a shine that it reflected the chandelier above like a dark mirror. The sight of it hit her like a physical pain in her chest. Elena forced herself to look away and continued serving the guests, but her eyes kept drifting back to the piano. It had been 5 years since she'd touched one. 5 years since everything changed. She could still remember the feeling of the keys under her fingers, the way the music used to flow through her like electricity. But that was another life. A life that ended on a rainy Tuesday night when a drunk driver ran a red light. "Excuse me, miss." A woman in a red dress was holding up her empty glass. Elena snapped back to reality and quickly moved to serve her, apologizing softly. This was her life now. Serving drinks to people who didn't even see her face, saving tips in a jar hidden in her closet, calling her brother every Sunday to make sure he was doing his homework. The party grew louder as the night went on. Someone had hired a jazz band, but they were taking a break, leaving only the sound of conversation and clinking glasses. Elena was clearing empty bottles from a side table when she had to pass close to the piano. Without thinking, her free hand brushed against its smooth surface as she walked by. The touch sent a shiver through her whole body, like meeting an old friend you thought you'd never see again. She didn't notice Richard Blackstone watching her from across the room. He was in the middle of telling a story about his latest business deal, but his sharp eyes had caught the way the waitress had touched his piano, the way her whole face had changed for just a second. He was the kind of man who noticed everything, filed it away, used it when it suited him. And he was bored. These parties were all the same people, the same conversations, the same pretend laughter. He threw them because it was expected, because deals were made over champagne and small talk. But tonight he'd been drinking more than usual, and the alcohol made him feel playful in a mean sort of way. He liked to show off his things, liked to remind people that he had the best of everything. The piano alone had cost more than most people's houses. Elena was in the kitchen loading her tray again, when she overheard two of the catering staff talking. "Did you see that piano?" one said. "I heard it used to belong to some famous pianist. Blackstone bought it at an auction for $500,000. Waste of money if you ask me," the other replied. "Bet he doesn't even play." Elena said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the glasses. $500,000. That piano was worth more than her parents' lives, according to the insurance company. More than the dreams she'd had to bury along with them. Back in the party, she tried to focus on her work, but the piano seemed to pull at her like a magnet. Every time she passed it, she felt that same ache, that same longing. It was torture. being so close to something that used to be her whole world and not being able to touch it, really touch it, make it sing the way it was meant to. At one point, while serving drinks to a group near the piano, she heard Blackstone telling someone about it. "It's not just any Steinway," he was saying, his voice carrying that special tone rich people used when talking about their expensive things. This particular one was played by Vladimir Horowitz himself. Can you imagine? The hands of genius touched these very keys. Elena's heart clenched. Horowitz. Her mother used to play his recordings for her when she was little, telling her that one day, maybe she'd be that good. "You have the gift, Mija," she'd say. "You just have to work hard and never give up." But sometimes life makes you give up whether you want to or not. The party was reaching its peak now. Someone had opened the terrace doors and cool air drifted in, mixing with the warmth of too many bodies in one space. Elena was making her final rounds, hoping to leave soon. Her brother would be waiting for her call, wanting to tell her about his day at school. She'd listen and encourage him, never mentioning that she'd spent her evening being invisible in a room full of people who could solve all their problems with a single check. As she moved through the crowd one last time, she had to squeeze past a group that had gathered near the piano. Someone had bumped into her, making her stumble slightly. To catch herself, her hand came down on the piano keys. Just for a second, just barely enough to make a sound. But that single accidental note rang out clear and true, cutting through the party noise like a knife. She froze. Several people turned to look. And across the room, Richard Blackstone's eyes locked onto her, a slow smile spreading across his face. He'd been waiting for something interesting to happen all night. And now, looking at the waitress who was staring at his piano, like it was a long-lost love, he thought he'd found exactly the entertainment he'd been looking for. Richard Blackstone set down his whiskey glass with a deliberate clink that somehow managed to cut through the party noise. He'd been watching the waitress for the last few minutes, ever since that accidental note had rung out from his piano. The way she'd looked at the instrument, like someone looking at a photograph of better days, had given him an idea. And when Richard Blackstone got an idea, especially after his fourth drink of the night, he usually acted on it. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone that wealthy people used when they wanted everyone to pay attention. "You there with the tray?" Elena's stomach dropped. She knew he was talking to her even before she turned around. In 3 years of catering, she'd learned to recognize trouble, and the look in Blackstone's eyes was definitely trouble. She turned, slowly, keeping her expression neutral the way she'd been trained. "Yes, sir? Come here for a moment." It wasn't a request. Nothing Richard Blackstone said ever was. Elena walked over, aware that conversations around them were dying down. People loved drama at these parties, especially when it involved someone else. She stopped a professional distance away, still holding her tray. "I couldn't help but notice," Blackstone said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "that you seem quite interested in my piano. You've been staring at it all evening. I apologize if I—" No, he interrupted, waving his hand. His smile was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm curious. Do you play?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her now. Some of the guests had moved closer, sensing entertainment. She recognized the look on their faces, the same look people had at the zoo when they were waiting for the lions to be fed. I used to play a little," she said quietly, hoping that would end it. But Blackstone's smile grew wider. He'd been right. This was going to be fun. "Used to? How wonderful. You simply must play something for us." "I really shouldn't, sir. I'm working and—" "Nonsense." He turned to the crowd, gesturing grandly. "Everyone, gather round. Our waitress here is going to treat us to a performance." Laughter rippled through the group. Someone whispered something about dinner and a show. Another person was already pulling out their phone, probably to record whatever was about to happen. Elena felt her face burning. She looked toward the kitchen, hoping her supervisor would save her, but he was nowhere to be seen. "I haven't played," In years, she said, trying one more time. I wouldn't want to damage your piano. Damage it? Blackstone laughed, and others joined in. My dear girl, this instrument has survived far worse than a waitress trying to remember her childhood lessons. Besides, his voice took on an edge. I insist. Consider it part of your service tonight. I'm sure your company wants to keep me happy, don't they? There it was. The threat wrapped in silk but still sharp enough to cut. Elena knew what he meant. One complaint from Richard Blackstone and she'd be fired, not just from tonight's event, but from the catering company entirely. And she needed this job. Her brother's school fees were due next week. The rent was already 5 days late. Perhaps just chopsticks? Someone suggested from the crowd, causing more laughter. Or Mary had a little lamb. Elena set down her tray on a nearby table, her hands shaking slightly. She could feel her phone buzzing in her pocket, probably her brother texting to say, "Good night." She ignored it and walked toward the piano, each step feeling like it took forever. The crowd had formed a semicircle around the piano now, like vultures waiting for something to die. She could hear them making bets on how badly she'd embarrass herself. Someone was telling a story about another party where they'd made the bartender attempt to juggle. It was hilarious, the woman was saying. He dropped everything. Elena reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. The black leather was soft and expensive, nothing like the worn bench she'd practiced on for all those years. She could see her reflection in the piano's polished surface. A tired young woman in a cheap catering uniform, surrounded by people in designer clothes. We're waiting, Blackstone said, checking his gold watch dramatically. Though, I suppose we shouldn't expect too much. After all, there's quite a difference between serving champagne and playing Chopin, isn't there? More laughter. Someone clinked their glass in agreement. Elena sat down slowly, adjusting the bench out of habit. Her hands were trembling as she placed them in her lap. She could walk away right now, she thought. Just stand up, apologize, and leave. Lose her job, disappoint her brother, fail to make rent. But keep her dignity. No. Dignity didn't pay bills. Dignity didn't keep her brother in school. Any day now, Blackstone said. He'd moved closer, standing where he could see both her face and the keyboard. He wanted to watch her struggle, wanted to see every moment of her humiliation. This was what he'd paid for, in a way, not just the party or the catering, but this moment of power, of making someone dance for him like a trained monkey. Elena looked at the keys, 88 of them, black and white, waiting. She could play something simple, make a few mistakes, let them have their laugh, and then go back to being invisible. That would be the smart thing to do. Give them what they expected, a poor girl fumbling through a half-remembered tune, confirming everything they believed about the difference between them and people like her. But then she remembered something her mother used to say. When life puts you on a stage, mija, you don't play for them, you play for yourself. She lifted her hands, positioning them over the keys. The room grew quieter, everyone waiting for the disaster they were sure was coming. Someone had definitely started recording on their phone now. She could see the little red light in her peripheral vision. Tomorrow she'd probably be a viral video. Rich man humiliates waitress at party. But as her fingers hovered over the keys, something strange happened. The fear started to fade, replaced by something else. Something she hadn't felt in 5 years. It was like muscle memory, but deeper. Soul memory, maybe. The piano wasn't her enemy. It never had been. It was the one thing that had never let her down, never lied to her, never abandoned her. Well, Blackstone prompted, impatient now. We haven't got all night. Some of us have actual important things to do. Elena took a deep breath. Around her, the party guests waited with cruel anticipation, their champagne glasses catching the light like little crystals of mockery. They thought they were about to watch a waitress embarrass herself for their entertainment. They thought they were about to confirm their beliefs about their own superiority. They were wrong. She closed her eyes for just a moment, shutting out their faces, their expensive clothes, their smirking expressions. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she wasn't a waitress in a cheap uniform anymore. She was 8 years old, sitting at the old, upright piano in her parents' living room. She was 15, playing her first recital. She was 20, accepting her scholarship to music school. She was herself again. When she opened her eyes, her hands were steady. The trembling had stopped. She looked down at the keys one more time, and then, without warning, without ceremony, without giving them the stumbling, hesitant beginning they were expecting, she began to play. The first notes weren't chopsticks or Mary Had a Little Lamb. They weren't even simple. They were the opening of something that would change everything in that room. But for now, in this last second before the music truly began, Elena allowed herself one small smile. They wanted a show. She'd give them one. They'd never forget. The first note Elena played was soft, almost like a whisper. It floated through the air so gently that some people didn't even realize she'd started. But then came the second note and the third, and suddenly the opening measures of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor were filling the room like water slowly rising. For a moment, the party guests kept their smirks in place, waiting for her to stumble, to hit a wrong note, to prove she was exactly what they thought she was. But as the introduction continued, something in the atmosphere began to shift. The piece wasn't simple. It wasn't even intermediate. It was one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire, and she was playing it like she was born to it. Richard Blackstone's smile began to fade. He knew this piece. He'd hired famous pianists to play at his parties before, and he'd heard them practice this exact ballade. Some of them had struggled with it, but this waitress, this nobody in a polyester uniform, was playing it with a delicacy that made his expensive whiskey suddenly taste cheap in his mouth. Elena's eyes were closed now. She couldn't see the way phones were being lowered, forgotten, in hands that had gone slack with surprise. She couldn't see the way conversations had completely died, leaving only the sound of Chopin's genius flowing through her fingers. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere 5 years in the past, when her biggest worry was whether she'd get the scholarship to study in Vienna or have to settle for the one in Boston. The music began to build, moving from the gentle introduction into the first theme. Her left hand started the rolling accompaniment while her right hand sang out the melody, each note clear and pure as struck crystal. Someone in the crowd gasped softly. It was Mrs. Hamilton, who served on the board of 3 different arts foundations. She knew talent when she heard it, and what she was hearing now was making her question everything about the young woman at the piano. "My God," someone whispered. "She's actually good." But good wasn't the right word. Good was what you called a talented student. Good was what you said about someone who could play well enough for a hotel lobby. What Elena was doing went beyond good. She was translating emotion directly through the keys, turning wood and wire and felt into pure human experience. As the piece moved into its more dramatic sections, Elena's whole body became part of the performance. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, her shoulders moving as she reached for the bass notes, her entire being focused on the conversation between her hands. The music wasn't just notes anymore, it was a story of loss, of longing, of memories that hurt too much to remember but were too precious to forget. Richard Blackstone took a step back without realizing it. He'd bought this piano as a status symbol, a thing to own, to show off. But watching Elena play it, he understood for the first time that he'd never really owned it at all. The piano belonged to people like her, people who could make it speak, make it sing, make it cry. The piece reached one of its most technically demanding passages, a section that required both tremendous skill and emotional maturity to execute properly. Elena's fingers flew across the keys in a blur of controlled chaos, never missing a note, never losing the thread of the melody, even as the harmony became increasingly complex. Several people in the crowd were now openly staring, their mouths slightly open. Among them was a man named Christopher Chen, who happened to be the music director of a prestigious performing arts center. He'd come to the party as someone's +1, expecting nothing more than free champagne and boring conversation. But what he was witnessing now was making him reach for his phone, not to record, but to text his assistant. Cancel my morning. Meetings. I've found something extraordinary. Elena was deep in the music now, in that place where time stops meaning anything. She wasn't aware of the tears running down her face, wasn't aware of the way the entire room had become still as a held breath. She was 20 again, playing for her final exam. She was 16 the first time she'd mastered this piece. She was 12 when her teacher had said she wasn't ready for Chopin yet, but her mother had believed in her anyway. The ballade moved into its final section, where all the themes came together in a passionate culmination. This was where most pianists showed their limits. It required not just technical skill but also the emotional depth to understand what Chopin was trying to say. Elena played it like she was pouring her heart directly onto the keys. Every loss, every sacrifice, every dream she'd had to abandon flowing through her fingers. A woman near the back of the room was crying. She didn't know why exactly, except that the music was reaching something deep inside her that she'd forgotten was there. Around her, others were having similar experiences. The mockery had completely vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. As Elena navigated the piece's ferocious coda, her hands moving in perfect synchronization despite the incredible difficulty, Blackstone found himself gripping his whiskey glass so tightly he was afraid it might shatter. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He'd wanted to embarrass her, to reinforce the natural order of things, to remind everyone that there were people who mattered and people who served drinks. But she was destroying that narrative with every note. The final passages of the ballade were approaching now, the music building to its dramatic conclusion. Elena's whole body was involved, her foot working the pedal with precise timing, her arms extended to reach the furthest keys, her face showing every emotion the music contained. She wasn't just playing the piece, she was living it. And then, with a final cascade of notes that seemed to hang in the air like diamonds, it was over. The last chord resonated through the room, through the expensive walls, through the hearts of everyone present. Elena's hands remained on the keys for a moment, as if she couldn't quite believe it was finished. Then slowly she lifted them and placed them in her lap. The silence that followed was complete. It wasn't the silence of boredom or indifference. It was the silence that comes after witnessing something sacred, something that reminds you that beauty exists in the world, even in the most unexpected places. Elena sat there, breathing heavily, still lost in the afterglow of the music. Her uniform was damp with perspiration. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose and her makeup was ruined by tears. But in that moment, she looked more dignified than anyone else in the room. Then, from somewhere in the back, came the sound of a single person clapping. It was slow, deliberate, respectful. Others joined in, one by one, until the entire room was applauding. But this wasn't the polite applause they usually gave at these events. This was real, coming from somewhere deeper than social obligation. Elena finally opened her eyes and seemed to remember where she was. The sight of all these wealthy people applauding her, the same people who'd been ready to laugh at her just minutes ago, was so surreal that for a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. She looked at their faces and saw something she'd never expected to see: respect. Some even looked ashamed. Richard Blackstone stood frozen, his face pale. He'd sobered up completely, the alcohol burned away by the recognition of what he'd just done. He'd tried to humiliate someone who possessed more genuine talent than he could ever hope to buy. The piano he'd purchased to impress people had just been played by someone who understood it in a way he never would. But Elena wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the piano, running her hand gently along its surface like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. Because she knew that in a few moments she'd have to stand up, go back to being a waitress, finish her shift, and go home to her small apartment where there was no piano, no music, only the silence of dreams deferred. The applause continued, but Elena barely heard it. She was still sitting at the piano, her hands trembling now that the music had stopped. Playing again after 5 years had broken something open inside her, something she'd worked so hard to keep locked away. The tears wouldn't stop coming, and she didn't even try to wipe them away. "Who are you?" The voice cut through the applause, like a blade. It belonged to a woman who had pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Elena recognized her immediately. Margaret Chen, the conductor of the New York Philharmonic. Her picture was in the arts section of the newspaper almost every week. Elena stood up shakily, suddenly aware of how she must look, her uniform wrinkled, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. "I'm nobody," she said quietly. "Just the waitress." "No," Margaret Chen said firmly. "That wasn't nobody playing. That was someone with years of advanced training. That was someone who understands Chopin not just technically but emotionally. So I'll ask again, who are you?" The room had gone quiet again. Everyone was watching, waiting. Elena looked around at all these faces, these people who 5 minutes ago had been ready to laugh at her, and something inside her finally snapped, not in anger but in exhaustion. She was so tired of hiding, so tired of pretending she was less than she was. "My name is Elena Martinez," she said, her voice stronger now. "I was a student at Juilliard until 5 years ago." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Juilliard. The name alone carried weight that everyone in that room understood. It wasn't a school you got into by being pretty good at music. It was where the future stars went, the ones who would play at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. "What happened?" Margaret Chen asked, her voice gentler now. Elena was quiet for a moment. She'd never told this story to anyone outside of necessary legal and financial conversations. But standing there in front of all these people who'd tried to humiliate her, she decided they deserved to know exactly who they'd been laughing at. "I was in my 3rd year," she began. "Full scholarship. My teachers said I had a promising career ahead of me. I was even selected to perform at the Young Artist Showcase that spring." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But in February, my parents were driving back from one of my recitals. It was raining. A drunk driver ran a red light. The silence in the room became heavy, uncomfortable. Someone set down their champagne glass with a soft clink. They died instantly," Elena continued, her voice flat now, like she was reading from a report. "I had to leave school to arrange the funerals, deal with the insurance, take care of my younger brother. He was only 13. The insurance money barely covered the funeral costs. My parents didn't have much savings. They'd spent everything on supporting my music education before I got the scholarship." Richard Blackstone's face had gone from pale to ashen. He was still standing near the piano, frozen like a statue. "I tried to go back to school," Elena said, "but my brother needed me. He was falling apart. He'd lost his parents too, and I was all he had left. So I made a choice. I dropped out, got whatever jobs I could find, and focused on keeping us both alive. Catering pays better than fast food, and the hours let me be home when he gets back from school." "But your talent," Margaret Chen said, looking genuinely distressed. "To waste such a gift." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Talent doesn't pay rent, it doesn't buy groceries or school supplies or medicine when your brother gets sick. I haven't touched a piano in 5 years because piano practice rooms cost money I don't have. I play music in my head while I serve champagne to people who spend more on one bottle than I make in a month." Several people in the crowd looked down at their drinks as if seeing them for the first time. "Tonight," Elena continued, looking directly at Richard Blackstone now, "I was forced to play for your entertainment. You wanted to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. Well, congratulations. You reminded me all right. You reminded me of everything I lost, everything I had to give up, everything I'll never get back." Blackstone opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? From the crowd, a younger man stepped forward. He looked nervous but determined. "I run a music education foundation," he said. "We provide instruments and practice spaces for talented musicians who can't afford them. Please let us help you get back to—" "No," Elena interrupted. "I'm 28 now. The classical music world doesn't want 28-year-old former prodigies who haven't practiced in 5 years. It wants fresh young talents who've never stopped working, never had life get in the way." "That's not true," Margaret Chen said forcefully. Talent like yours doesn't just disappear. It might be rusty, but what I just heard wasn't rust, it was pure artistry. The Philharmonic has openings for our Young Artists program. It's not limited by age, just ability. And you clearly have the ability. Elena shook her head. You don't understand. I can't just abandon my responsibilities. My brother is about to start college next year. He got into Columbia, pre-med. He's brilliant, and he's going to make something of himself. I won't let anything jeopardize that. What's his name? Someone asked from the crowd. Diego, Elena said. And for the first time, she smiled a real smile. He's everything. He's why I get up every morning. Why I work these parties, why I smile when people treat me like furniture. Because he's going to have the future that got taken away from us. Margaret Chen pulled out a business card from her purse. I want you to call me, she said, pressing it into Elena's hand. Not for you if you don't want it for yourself, but there are paid positions, teaching young musicians, playing for rehearsals, ways you could be around music again and still support your brother. Others were stepping forward now, pulling out business cards, making offers. Someone mentioned a scholarship fund for her brother. Another person, a lawyer apparently, offered to look into the drunk driving case pro bono to see if there was any additional compensation owed. Richard Blackstone finally found his voice. I'll pay for everything, he said suddenly loudly. Your brother's education, your return to Juilliard, living expenses, everything. Elena turned to look at him. Really look at him. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished. The powerful real estate mogul who'd commanded the room an hour ago now looked like what he really was. A man who'd discovered that all his money couldn't buy him the ability to create beauty, only to own beautiful things he didn't understand. You want to pay? Elena asked quietly. You want to throw money at this and make it go away? Make yourself feel better about what you did tonight? I want to help, he stammered. No, Elena said. You wanted to hurt. There's a difference. You saw someone you thought was beneath you and decided to remind them of it. The only reason you want to help now is because you found out I'm not what you thought I was. But what if I had been? What if I really had been just a waitress who learned to play a little piano as a child? Would that have made what you did tonight okay? The room was silent. Several people were looking at Blackstone with expressions of disgust, perhaps seeing themselves reflected in him. Elena picked up her serving tray from where she'd left it. I have to finish my shift, she said simply. My supervisor will dock my pay if I don't. You can't be serious, someone said. After what we just heard, after that performance? That performance doesn't change the fact that I'm contracted to work until 11, Elena replied. And unlike some people in this room, I honor my commitments. She started to walk away, but Margaret Chen caught her arm gently. Please, she said. At least think about calling me. The world needs to hear. You play. Elena looked at the card in her hand, then at the piano, then at all the faces watching her. The world heard me play for 20 years, she said. Then the world took away the two people who mattered most and told me to figure it out on my own. I don't owe the world anything, but she kept the card. Elena went back to serving drinks, but the party had changed. No one could look at her the same way. When she approached with her tray, people stepped aside respectfully, some even apologizing quietly. The laughter had died down to murmurs, and more than a few guests left early, unable to shake the discomfort of what they'd witnessed. Not just her talent, but their own cruelty. Richard Blackstone had disappeared into his study and didn't come out for the rest of the evening. The party continued without him, but it felt hollow, like everyone was going through the motions. Elena worked steadily, professionally, refusing to acknowledge the stares or the whispered conversations that followed her around the room. At exactly 11 o'clock, she returned to the kitchen, turned in her tray, and collected her things. Her supervisor, who'd heard about what happened from the other staff, tried to say something, but Elena just shook her head. She was too tired for sympathy, too drained for conversation. She just wanted to go home. The subway ride back to Queens felt longer than usual. Elena sat in the fluorescent-lit car, still wearing her catering uniform, Margaret Chen's business card burning a hole in her pocket. Around her, other late-night workers dozed or scrolled through their phones, everyone in their own world of exhaustion and small dreams. When she finally got home to her tiny apartment, she found Diego waiting up for her, his textbooks spread across the kitchen table. He was 17 now, tall and serious, with their mother's eyes and their father's stubborn chin. "You're late," he said, looking up from his biology notes. "Everything okay?" Elena wanted to tell him everything, wanted to pour out the whole story, but looking at him surrounded by his books, his future spread out before him like a promise, she just couldn't. "Long night," she said instead. "Rich people being rich people." But Diego knew her too well. He'd been watching her carefully for 5 years, the same way she watched him. "Elena," he said quietly, "you've been crying." She touched her face, surprised to find it still damp. "It's nothing, just tired. You should be in bed." "I heard something," he said, not moving. "From Mickey. His cousin works catering too, was at Mao. Some party tonight. He said you played piano. Said you made a whole room of rich people cry." Elena sank into the chair across from him. "Diego, why didn't you tell me you could still play like that?" "Because I can't," she said. It was a fluke, a mistake. Some rich jerk wanted to humiliate me and it backfired, that's all." Diego was quiet for a moment. Then he reached under his textbook and pulled out something that made Elena's heart stop. It was a folder, worn and carefully preserved. Their mother's folder, the one where she'd kept every program, every review, every picture from Elena's performances. "I found this last month when I was looking for my birth certificate," he said. "I've been reading about you, the real you, the one who was going to play at Carnegie Hall. Diego, that person doesn't exist anymore." "Yes, she does." His voice was fierce now, reminding her so much of their father when he'd believed in something. "She's been serving champagne and checking my homework and making sure I eat vegetables. She's been sacrificing everything for me." "It's not a sacrifice. You're my brother, and you're my sister," he shot back. "You think I don't know what you gave up? You think I'm stupid? I know you dropped out of Juilliard for me. I know you work 3 jobs so I can focus on school. I know you haven't touched a piano because you're too busy making sure I have everything I need. You need to focus on your future." "What about your future?" Diego interrupted. "When does Elena get to matter? When do your dreams count?" Elena felt fresh tears starting. "My dreams died with Mom and Dad." "No," Diego said firmly. "You buried them. There's a difference." He stood up and walked around the table, pulling her into a hug. "I'm 17, Elena. I got a full scholarship to Columbia. I have a weekend job at the lab that pays well. I don't need you to sacrifice anymore. But listen to me," he said, pulling back to look at her face. "Mom and Dad would be heartbroken if they knew you gave up music for me. They'd want us both to succeed, not just me." Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out Margaret Chen's card, setting it on the table, between them. Diego picked it up, his eyes widening. "The New York Philharmonic. Elena, it's nothing, she was just being nice." "People like her don't give out cards to be nice," Diego said. "Call her." "I can't. I haven't practiced properly in 5 years, I'd embarrass myself." "You just played at a party tonight without any practice and made people cry. That was different, I don't know what that was." Diego sat back down, but he kept the card. "You know what I remember most about Mom and Dad?" he asked. "Not the accident, not the funeral. I remember Sunday mornings when you'd play piano and Mom would sing and Dad would make breakfast. I remember being happy. I remember music making us a family." Elena couldn't speak. Those Sunday mornings felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. "I don't want to be the reason you never play again," Diego continued. "I don't want to graduate knowing my success came from killing your dreams. That's not what family does." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Diego reached for his laptop. "Look," he said, turning the screen toward her. It was a video someone had posted online just an hour ago. The title read, "Waitress Stuns Millionaires." Party with Chopin. It already had thousands of views. Elena watched herself on the screen, seeing what everyone else had seen, a young woman in a cheap uniform playing with the skill and passion of a concert pianist. The comments were pouring in. Who is she? This made me cry. Someone find her and get her on a stage where she belongs. The world wants to hear you play, Diego said softly. And more importantly, I want to hear you play. Not in secret, not with guilt, but really play. Be who you really are. The next morning, Elena called Margaret Chen. The conductor answered on the second ring as if she'd been waiting. I was hoping you'd call, she said. Can you come to the Philharmonic this afternoon? I have a shift at... Cancel it, Margaret said firmly. This is more important. Elena wanted to argue, to say that nothing was more important than paying rent, but something in the conductor's voice stopped her. Okay, she heard herself say. That afternoon, she walked into the New York Philharmonic's rehearsal hall wearing her best dress, which wasn't very good, but it was better than her uniform. Margaret was there with several other people, including Christopher Chen from the party. Play for us, Margaret said simply, gesturing to the piano. No pressure, no judgment, just play. This time, Elena didn't hesitate. She sat down and played, really played, without fear or shame or the weight of other people's expectations. She played Bach and Beethoven, Rachmaninoff and Liszt. She played until her fingers ached and her heart felt light for the first time in 5 years. When she finished, Margaret was smiling. We have a position, she said. Assistant pianist for the Philharmonic with solo opportunities, full salary, benefits, and most importantly, access to practice rooms whenever you want. You'd also teach master classes for young musicians. It's not charity. You'd earn every penny. Elena thought about her brother's words, about her parents, about the video with thousands of views. She thought about Richard Blackstone trying to humiliate her and instead setting her free. Yes, she said. Yes. 6 months later, Elena Martinez made her solo debut at Carnegie Hall. The program notes mentioned her unusual path back to music, but they focused more on her extraordinary talent. In the audience, Diego sat in the front row crying openly, not caring who saw. Also in the audience, in a back corner where he wouldn't be noticed, sat Richard Blackstone. He'd bought a ticket like everyone else, no special treatment. When Elena took her final bow to thunderous applause, he stood with everyone else, applauding the waitress who taught him that talent isn't something you can buy or humiliate or own. It's something that survives even when life tries to silence it. It waits, patient and powerful, for the moment when it can finally sing again. And that night in Carnegie Hall, Elena's talent didn't just sing. It soared,